You don't have a revolution desegregating the toilet. You don't have a revolution desegregating the lunch counter. You don't have a revolution desegregating the theater. There's no such thing as a peaceful revolution. There's no such thing as a bloodless revolution.
You've called people like Martin Luther King, who just got a Nobel Peace Prize, an Uncle Tom. Is this correct?
We're moving to the land of freedom. Yes, sir. I know you're asking today, how long will it take? Somebody's asking, how long will prejudice blind the visions of men? I come to say to you this afternoon, however difficult the moment, yes, sir, however frustrating the hour, it will not be long, no, because truth crushed earth will rise again. Yes, sir. How long? Not long. Yes, sir. Because no lie can live forever. Yes, sir. How long? Not long. How long? Because you shall reap what you sow. Yes, sir. How long? Not long. How long? Truth forever on the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne. Yet that scaffold sways the future. Behind the dim unknown standeth God within the shadow, keeping watch above his own. How long? Not long. Because the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. How long? Not long. Because mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He's trampling out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He's loosed the fateful lightning of his terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on. He has sounded forth the trumpet that shall never call retreat. He is sifting out the hearts of men before his judgment seat. Oh, be swift, my soul, to answer him. Be jubilant, my feet. Our God is marching on. Glory, hallelujah. Glory, hallelujah. Glory, hallelujah. Glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on.
It was a high moment, a great watershed moment. But I must confess that that dream that I had that day has at many points turned into a nightmare.
Martin Luther King Jr. is celebrated today as an American hero. His name graces street signs and schools, his likeness is enshrined in monuments, and his words are quoted reverently in classrooms and congressional speeches. By contrast, Malcolm X is often remembered more cautiously, evoked as a symbol of anger or militant resistance rather than a national hero. Two men lived in the same era. Both were monitored and surveilled by their government. Both were assassinated. But only one has been embraced as a national myth, folded into the American story, while the other is frequently treated as a cautionary tale. Why is Martin Luther King Jr. everywhere on our calendars, in our history textbooks, held up as the epitome of justice, while Malcolm X is remembered more as a warning than a hero? This is not a question of who was right in their vision or tactics. It's a question of legibility. Who was allowed to remain acceptable in the American memory and why? Who gets the microphone and who gets muted? If power has a say in which voices get amplified or diluted, then perhaps we must ask, are we listening to authentic voices or comfortable echoes of what power finds acceptable? Martin Luther King Jr. is taught to us as a kind of sanitized saint. We learn about the minister who had a dream of little black children and little white children holding hands, about the apostle of nonviolence who preached love and unity. In the national folklore, King stands for harmony and racial healing. His story has been flattened into a few feel-good tropes, the soaring "I have a dream" speech and the triumph of civil rights laws. This version of King emphasizes a hopeful vision and the tactic of peaceful protest, which is palatable to all. Politicians across the spectrum invoke his name, often selectively quoting content of their character, not the color of their skin, to claim his moral endorsement. Over time, the story of King's activism has been watered down, obscuring the real complexity and controversial stances of the man. The King we celebrate on the third Monday of January keeps getting smaller and more simplified. What's left out of this mainstream narrative is that Dr. King was far more radical than the cherry-picked quotes on plaques and memorials suggest. The same man who spoke of dreams also spoke of disillusionment with American capitalism and militarism. In his final years, King argued that the United States needed a radical revolution of values to move from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented one, and he condemned the giant triplets of racism, materialism, and militarism. He publicly opposed the Vietnam War at a time when such dissent was widely unpopular, declaring that his own government was the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. He critiqued the American economic system for producing inequality, asking pointedly, "Why are there 40 million poor people in America?" and warning that when you begin to ask that question, you begin to question the capitalistic economy. King advocated for economic justice and planned the Poor People's Campaign, demanding a massive redistribution of wealth. He chastised the white moderate who preferred order over justice, writing from a jail cell that this preference posed a great obstacle to freedom.
This business of burning human beings with napalm, of filling our nation's homes with orphans and widows, of injecting poisonous drugs of hate into the veins of peoples normally humane, sending men home from dark and bloody battlefields, physically handicapped and psychologically deranged, cannot be reconciled with wisdom, justice, and love. A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death.
These uncompromising positions rarely survive the journey into classrooms or commemorative speeches. What reaches us instead is a careful edit, a version of King shaped not by conflict but by comfort. The Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial in Washington, D.C. is etched with his words, yet nowhere on its stone surface do the words segregation or racism appear. The absence is not accidental, it is instructive. In polishing his legacy, the nation did not erase King, but it softened him. It elevated his language of love and unity while muting his direct confrontation with American power, its wars, its economic violence, its racial hierarchy. The sharper edges were filed down. The demands that made people uneasy were set aside. This is not how King was received in his own time. By the mid-1960s, as he spoke more forcefully about poverty and the moral cost of war, public opinion turned sharply against him. Nearly 3/4 of Americans disapproved of Dr. King. He was called dangerous, divisive, and unpatriotic. The figure now held up as a symbol of national harmony was once seen as a threat to it. That discomfort has since been smoothed away. There is a widespread impulse to say, we honor Dr. King without wrestling with the depth of what he demanded, or the systems he insisted had to be dismantled. Memory prefers resolution over tension. Monuments prefer silence over accusation. Dr. King was not safe in his lifetime. He was made safe by history. The radical challenge he posed to the nation was slowly pared back, reshaped, and placed gently into a pantheon where it could inspire without unsettling, where it could be celebrated without being followed.
At the very same time that America refused to give the Negro any land, through an act of Congress, our government was giving away millions of acres of land in the West and the Midwest, which meant that it was willing to undergird its white peasants from Europe with an economic floor. But not only did they give the land, they built land-grant colleges with government money to teach them how to farm. Not only that, they provided county agents to further their expertise in farming. Not only that, they provided low interest rates in order that they could mechanize their farms. Not only that, today many of these people are receiving millions of dollars in federal subsidies not to farm, and they are the very people telling the black man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps. And this is what we are faced with, and this is the reality. Now, when we come to Washington in this campaign, we are coming to get our check.
If Martin Luther King Jr. had to be edited to be widely embraced, we have to ask, what becomes of someone who refuses to be edited? What about a leader who did not speak in a register the American mainstream found comforting? To answer that, we turn to the other man in this story, the one who did not dream of national reconciliation but rather issued a bold indictment of the entire system. Malcolm X stood in deliberate opposition to comfort. Where others sought to reassure the nation, he unsettled it. Where King appealed to America's conscience, Malcolm questioned its right to judge at all. He did not speak the language of harmony, he spoke the language of power. Malcolm refused the promise that dignity could be earned through patience or politeness. He rejected the idea that freedom arrives slowly, granted by the same structures that had denied it for centuries. Instead, he spoke of self-determination, of accountability, of a people claiming ownership over their lives without apology. His words were sharp by design, unflinching, often unforgiving. He did not ask to be accepted, he demanded to be free by any means necessary. This was not a plea for inclusion, but a declaration of sovereignty. To a nation accustomed to black leadership framed through forgiveness, restraint, and appeals to American ideals, Malcolm's clarity felt dangerous. He stripped away euphemism. He named white supremacy without softening its edges, and in doing so, he shattered the illusion that injustice could be solved through tone alone, and that refusal made him threatening.
The so-called Negro community has shocked the white man by resisting all efforts to divide us. I think that you and I should continue to shock him by staying and working together in unity. Despite religious, political, economic, or educational or social differences, let us remember that we are not brutalized because we're Baptists. We're not brutalized because we're Methodists. We're not brutalized because we're Muslims. We're not brutalized because we're Catholics. We're brutalized because we are black people in America. Here, your mother is being raped, and you're not supposed to be emotional. Your women, please, your women can't walk the street without some cracker putting his hands on her, and you're not supposed to be emotional. If you say that you're fed up, if you teach the Negro, they don't even know their own name. Why? Because he took it away from them. Please. 20 million black people don't even know their own language. Why? Because he took it away from them. 20 million black people who don't even know the history of their ancestors. Why? Because he took it away from them. And if you try and tell them how thoroughly and completely they've been robbed, he says you're teaching hate. That's something to think about. Today you are coming out of college. You're coming out of the leading universities. You're trying to go in a good direction, but you don't know which direction to go in. And if somebody tries to take you right to the root of your problem, they say that that man's a hate teacher. If I ask why should the senators in Washington, and then again if we tell you that Negroes are being hung on the tree or being shot down illegally, unjustly, and those Negroes should do something to protect themselves, you say you're advocating violence. The white man is tricking you. He's trapping you. He doesn't call it violence when he lands troops in South Vietnam. He doesn't call it violence when he lands troops in Berlin. When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, he didn't say get nonviolent. He said praise the Lord, but pass the ammunition. But when someone attacks you, when someone comes at you with a club, when someone comes at you with a rope, when someone comes at you with a gun, despite the fact that you've done nothing, he tells you, suffer peacefully. Pray for those who use you despitefully. Be long-suffering. And how long can you suffer after suffering for 400 years? So I just want to clear up that little point right there, because he says that we play on your emotions. And when you turn on your television tonight, or your radio, or read the newspaper, they're going to tell you in that paper that I was playing on your emotions. Imagine you, a second-class citizen. That's not getting emotional, it's getting intelligent.
Malcolm X was frequently reduced to a caricature misread as a preacher of hate, as an advocate of violence when, at its core, his message was something far more unsettling, that black people were worthy of love, dignity, and defense without needing permission, that self-respect was not extremism, that self-love, in a system built on negation, would always be seen as aggression. His fire did not come from cruelty, it came from clarity, and in a society that preferred its prophets gentle and its critiques symbolic, Malcolm's insistence on truth spoken plainly, without sugar or salvation, felt incendiary simply because it refused to lie.
Assalamu alaikum. Mr. Moderator, our distinguished guests, brothers and sisters, our friends and our enemies. Everybody is here. As many of you know, last March, when it was announced that I was no longer in the Black Muslim movement, it was pointed out that it was my intention to work among the 22 million non-Muslim Afro-Americans and to try and form some type of organization or create a situation where the young people, our young people, the students and others, could study the problems of our people for a period of time and then come up with a new analysis and give us some new ideas and some new suggestions as to how to approach a problem that too many other people had been playing around with for too long. And that we would have some kind of meeting and determine at a later date whether to form a black nationalist party or a black nationalist army. There have been many of our people across the country from all walks of life who have taken it upon themselves to try and pool their ideas and to come up with some kind of solution to the problem that confronts all of our people. And tonight we are here to try and get an understanding of what it is they've come up with. Also, recently, when I was blessed to make a trip or a pilgrimage, a religious pilgrimage to the holy city of Mecca, where I met many people from all over the world, plus spent many weeks in Africa, trying to broaden my own scope and get more of an open mind to look at the problem as it actually is. One of the things that I realized, and I realized this even before going over there, was that our African brothers have gained their independence faster than you and I here in America have. They've also gained recognition and respect as human beings much faster than you and I. Just 10 years ago on the African continent, our people were colonized. They were suffering all forms of colonization, oppression, exploitation, degradation, humiliation, discrimination, and every other kind of Asian. And in a short time, they have gained more independence, more recognition, more respect as human beings than you and I have. And you and I live in a country which is supposed to be the citadel of education, freedom, justice, democracy, and all of those other pretty sounding words. So it was our intention to try and find out what was our African brothers doing to get results so that you and I could study what they had done and perhaps gain from that study or benefit from their experiences. And my traveling over there was designed to help to find out how. One of the first things that the independent African nations did was to form an organization called the Organization of African Unity. The purpose of our Organization of Afro-American Unity, which has the same aim and objective, to fight whoever gets in our way. To bring about the complete independence of people of African descent here in the Western Hemisphere and first here in the United States, and bring about the freedom of these people by any means necessary. That's our motto. The purpose of our organization is to start right here in Harlem which has the largest concentration of people of African descent that exists anywhere on this earth. There are more Africans here in Harlem than exist in any city on the African continent, because that's what you and I are, Africans. The Charter of the United Nations, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Constitution of the United States, and the Bill of Rights are the principles in which we believe, and that these documents, if put into practice, represent the essence of mankind's hopes and good intentions, desirous that all Afro-American people and organizations should henceforth unite so that the welfare and well-being of our people will be assured. We are resolved to reinforce the common bond of purpose between our people by submerging all of our differences and establishing non-sectarian constructive programs for human rights. We hereby present this charter. Number one, the establishment. The Organization of Afro-American Unity shall include all people of African descent in the Western Hemisphere. In essence, what it is saying, instead of you and me running around here seeking allies in our struggle for freedom, in the Irish neighborhood or the Jewish neighborhood or the Italian neighborhood, we need to seek some allies among people who look something like we do. And once we get their allies, it's time out for you and me to stop running away from the wolf right into the arms of the fox, looking for some kind of help. That's a drag. Number two, self-defense. Since self-preservation is the first law of nature, we assert the Afro-American's right to self-defense. The Constitution of the United States of America clearly affirms the right of every American citizen to bear arms. And as Americans, we will not give up a single right guaranteed under the Constitution. The history of unpunished violence against our people clearly indicates that we must be prepared to defend ourselves, or we will continue to be a defenseless people at the mercy of a ruthless and violent racist mob.
Malcolm X named white supremacy as an entrenched system. He famously declared that racism was not a flaw in the American system but its very foundation, asserting that the United States was incapable of providing real freedom to black people any more than a chicken could lay a duck egg. Such statements struck at the heart of America's self-image. Malcolm didn't shy away from pointing out American hypocrisy. He would ask how a country that was violent abroad fighting wars in Korea or Vietnam could preach nonviolence to the oppressed at home. He turned the mirror back on the oppressor, indicting America as the major purveyor of violence and injustice. This analysis so clear and precise that it is almost prophetic. Malcolm's grasp of racism left little room for white Americans to feel comfortable. Unlike King's appeals to the nation's better angels, Malcolm confronted the nation with its demons. Central to Malcolm X's message was the idea of psychological decolonization. He urged black Americans to shed the inferiority complex instilled by centuries of white domination. He stressed pride in African heritage and taught that loving oneself and one's people was a revolutionary act in a society built on black subjugation. You can't hate the roots of a tree and not hate the tree, meaning you cannot love Africa, the roots, without embracing black identity in America. This message of mental emancipation was empowering, but to those invested in the status quo, it was dangerous. A black population that no longer felt grateful for token inclusion, but instead felt entitled to power and justice on its own terms, was a population that could not be easily managed. Malcolm also championed the right of self-defense. He rejected the notion that black Americans should remain passive in the face of racist attacks. "I don't call it violence when it's self-defense," Malcolm said bluntly. "I call it intelligence." Rather than turn the other cheek, he advised that if a man assaults you, you should send him to the cemetery in self-protection. This stance was caricatured by the media as Malcolm advocating violence, earning him hostile labels. Newspapers and television largely portrayed him as the angry black militant in contrast to King's saintly pacifist. The press at times went so far as to call him an apostle of hate, a characterization that did not match the reality of Malcolm's nuanced critique of racism. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover took Malcolm's rise so seriously that the Bureau devoted extensive resources to surveilling and discrediting him. The FBI's files on Malcolm X would ultimately swell to thousands of pages.
We are African, and we happen to be in America. We're not American. We are people who formerly were Africans who were kidnapped and brought to America. Our forefathers weren't the Pilgrims. We didn't land on Plymouth Rock. The rock was landed on us. We were brought here against our will. We were not brought here to be made citizens. We were not brought here to enjoy the constitutional gifts that they speak so beautifully about today. Because we weren't brought here to be made citizens today, now that we've become awakened to some degree and we begin to ask for those things which they say are supposedly for Americans, they look upon us with hostility and unfriendliness. If you're interested in freedom, you need some judo, you need some karate, you need all the things that will help you fight for freedom. Nationalism is the wave of the present and the future. It is nationalism that's bringing freedom to oppressed people all over the world. It was nationalism that brought freedom to the Algerians. It was nationalism that brought freedom to the Nigerians and to the Ghanaians. It was nationalism that brought freedom to the people of Uganda and Tanganyika and Sudan and Somaliland. The Africans didn't get it by sitting in. They didn't get it by waiting in. They didn't get it by singing "We Shall Overcome." They got it through nationalism. And you and I will get it through nationalism. What is it? What is it that makes it difficult for the philosophy of nationalism to spread among the so-called Negroes? Number one, they think they have a stake in America. They think they have an investment in this country, which we do. We invested 310 years of slave labor, 310 years, every day of which your and my mother and father worked for nothing. Not 8 hours a day. There was no union in that day. They worked from sun up until sundown, from can't see in the morning until can't see at night. They never had a day off. And on Sunday, they were allowed to sit down and sing about when they died, they wouldn't be slaves no more. When they died, they wouldn't be slaves no more. They'd go up in the sky, and every day would be Sunday. That's a shame. And it is that 310 years of slave labor that went in, that was my and your contribution into this particular economy and political system. They can give us the back pay. Let's join in. If this is what the Negro wants, let's join in. Let's show him how to struggle. Let's show him how to fight. Let's show him how to bring about a real revolution. Let's make him stop jiving. You don't need a debate. You don't need a filibuster. You need some action.
All of this made Malcolm X effectively uncontainable within the boundaries of acceptable dissent. He wasn't someone whose message could be easily co-opted or softened without losing its essence. Malcolm did not seek legitimacy from the American political establishment. In fact, he questioned the legitimacy of that establishment itself. As we will see, he didn't beg America to live up to its ideals. He challenged whether those ideals had ever truly included black people. If King's approach asked America to be better, Malcolm's approach asked if America's power structure had any moral right to continue as it was. One man asked the country to live up to its stated creed. The other asked whether the creed was a lie to begin with. One appealed to America's soul. The other prosecuted America's sins. And when those in power feel fundamentally threatened, they do more than oppose you. They make sure your legacy itself is tightly controlled. The differing strategies of King and Malcolm can be understood as civil rights versus human rights, or domestic reform versus international prosecution. King's movement, for all its courage, largely framed Black American struggle as a demand that the United States fulfill its own promise. The appeals were made in the language of the Constitution and Christianity. King and his allies petitioned the courts, lobbied Congress, and implored white America's moral sensibilities. The implicit premise was that the system was fundamentally sound if only it would apply its principles fairly to Black citizens. Thus, the civil rights movement sought reforms within the American framework, ending segregation, securing voting rights, and appealed to America's ideals of freedom and equality. This approach, while confrontational in practice, stopped short of rejecting the legitimacy of the U.S. government. In essence, King's cause was framed as America's great moral correction of fulfillment of democracy.
Well, for the past 10 years, the struggle in America has been confined to what has been projected to the public as a civil rights struggle. And in that context, it has remained a domestic problem. It has remained within the jurisdiction of the United States. And as such, it has been impossible for the Afro-Americans or American Negroes to try and enlist the support of other dark-skinned people who are being oppressed the world over in that struggle. And the difference now in the direction that the struggle is taking from the direction that the struggle has been going in the past, there are many of our people who are thinking more deeply and more broadly and are beginning to see the importance of lifting it out of the national context or out of the domestic context or beyond the jurisdiction of the United States government. And the only way this can be done is by internationalizing the problem and putting it at a level where it can be taken into the United Nations, and then all of the other independent nations on this earth can involve themselves in our struggle and support us. And the only way by which this can be done, instead of it being called civil rights in the future, we're going to have to label it a human rights struggle or the struggle for human rights. And as such, we can then take it into the United Nations through the avenues that have been set up by the United Nations Commission on Human Rights. We can take our problem before the United Nations in the same manner that the problem of South Africa, Angola, Mozambique, Hungary, the Arab refugee problem, it becomes a world problem. And as a world problem, then the Afro-American or the so-called Negroes full results, because it's not left up to the one who's responsible for it anymore, but it's put at a level where the whole can see that our plight is wrong. It stood in our path in the past. It also makes a difference in the leadership. Those who have been posing as leaders of our people in America in the past, they can pose on this local stage where Uncle Sam is the master of the show and can prop them up and make them look good or make them look better than they actually are by giving them token gains and building them up an image. But when they step onto the international stage or the world stage, then Uncle Sam can't prop them up anymore. And their ability or lack of ability becomes exposed. And if they can lead us forward, they remain leaders. But if they can't, then they have to step aside and more qualified and bona fide leaders step up from the masses of our people, and then we get faster progress, we get more results. The Afro-American or American Negro intellectual perhaps permitted himself to be used in a way that wasn't really beneficial to the overall Afro-American struggle. But I think today these intellectuals have begun to undertake a new appraisal of the problem, looking at it as it actually is, and are beginning to see it more in the international context and the relation that it has with the African struggle. And the African intellectual is beginning to look at the problem in the African context and see that what might be good in one country, in order for it to be used in another country, has to be rearranged. You take African socialism. Many of the African intellectuals that have analyzed the approach of socialism are beginning to see where the African has to use a form of socialism that fits into the African context, whereas the form that is used in a European country might be good for that particular European country. It doesn't fit as well into the African context. So I think the African intellectual is making that contribution, and he's making it well.
Malcolm X took a very different view. He argued that civil rights in the U.S. context kept the fight confined as a domestic issue under the jurisdiction of the very government that had perpetrated the injustice. He famously stated, "As long as these injustices are labeled by us as civil rights, this remains a domestic issue. So all the civil rights groups have to do is expand the struggle to the level of human rights. When you recast the black freedom struggle as human rights, you take the issue to a global stage." And crucially, Malcolm noted, once on the world stage, one could charge the U.S. with violating the United Nations Charter on Human Rights. In Malcolm's eyes, the plight of black Americans was not just an American moral failing, it was an international crime against humanity. This internationalization of the black struggle was a direct threat to U.S. authorities. In the middle of the Cold War, when America styled itself the leader of the free world, Malcolm was traveling across Africa and Asia, drawing parallels between the African American struggle and anti-colonial movements worldwide. He spoke at the Organization of African Unity, forging connections with leaders of newly independent nations. He told African and Middle Eastern audiences that black Americans were kin to them in the fight against Western imperialism. If King petitioned America's Congress, Malcolm was prepared to petition the United Nations. Once it's expanded to the level of human rights, Malcolm explained, we have the support of billions of black, brown, red, and yellow people from all over this earth behind us. He had even secured promises from several African governments to bring the issue of America's racist policies before the UN as a human rights violation. This was, without exaggeration, explosive. It threatened to expose the hypocrisy of a nation that preached democracy abroad while tolerating racial terror at home. As historian John Henrik Clarke observed, I don't think this nation wanted to suffer the embarrassment. He was exposing colonialism. King's strategy of reform, as hard-fought as it was, could ultimately be absorbed by American institutions, pass a new law here, issue a new federal program there, and claim the nation was moving toward its ideals. But Malcolm's strategy of prosecution treating America as a culpable perpetrator of human rights abuses threatened the very legitimacy of the U.S. on the world stage. King kept the spotlight on American democratic processes, which to be sure still brought the Federal Bureau of Investigation upon him when he got too radical. Malcolm, however, invited the world's judgment of America. As he put it, whenever you take into the white man's court, you will never get justice. It's like taking your case from the wolf to the fox. The only hope was to take it to the United Nations, a court where everyone has an equal vote.
Dr. King, we believe that your experience and your training and your dedication to the realization of having all men live in a free society, that you can provide us with some ideas, some methods, some techniques, some words of wisdom as to how we might achieve that and those goals in America. And one of the things we'd like to ask you to discuss with us is, what is the particular problem which confronts the Negro in the South today in the efforts to obtain freedom and first-class citizenship?
Well, I think the biggest problem that the Negro confronts in the South today is the continued existence of a system which stares him in the face almost every day, saying you are less than, you are not equal to. And I refer to the system of segregation. The tragedy of the system of segregation is that it not only harms one physically and makes for physical inconveniences, but it does something to the soul. It gives the segregator a false sense of superiority, and it leaves the segregated with a false sense of inferiority. So that this is one of the things that, and probably the major problem that the Negro confronts in the South in his struggle for freedom and human dignity, the continued existence of this system and the resistance of forces that are not really in line with the struggle for freedom, forces that are enemies to democracy. So that on the one hand there is a system, on the other hand there is a strong resistance of forces that would say they will never comply with the law of the land. And their legislative halls ring loud with such words as interposition and nullification. so that we see this defiance. Now, I don't want to give the impression that there has been no progress in this area. Certainly, the system is gradually breaking down, and this, I think, is a very hopeful sign. And as the system breaks down, it makes it better, and it makes it possible, in a greater sense, for the Negro to achieve the freedom which is his aim and his goal.
Have there been, Dr. King, any historical facts within the past decade which you would say has been most effective in strengthening the Negro's zeal for achieving first-class citizenship?
Yes,
For instance, the Supreme Court decision.
Sure.
An important historical factor.
I think so. I think the Supreme Court's decision of 1954 did a great deal to give the Negro a new sense of hope and also a new sense of dignity and self-respect. I think this was one of the greatest forces in this decade, or certainly in this century, to give the Negro a new determination and a new inner sense of dignity and a new sense of destiny. Not only that, I think world opinion, the rolling tide of world opinion has had a lot to do with the new sense of dignity of the Negro. The fact that you've had an independent struggle in so many countries in Asia and so many countries in Africa, I think gave the Negro a new sense of worth, and all of these forces have conjoined to make for a real sense of hope and a real sense of dignity on the part of the Negro.
It's interesting to many of the students of the problem of minority groups in this country that the Supreme Court decision, as it seeks to remove segregation from the schools of the South, does not deal with something of a counterpart in northern communities. And that is that unless we are quite careful to break down the racial ghettos which exist in the North, that the North has the real potential of having a more firmly entrenched segregated school system based on neighborhood segregation than the South. Now, does that suggest some particular approaches for northern communities?
I think so. I think it is quite true that in the North you have potential for great racial conflict and certainly a type of segregation that is not legally enhanced but has subtle and hidden forms which in many instances are much more difficult to get at. This housing problem, which is a national problem, is one of the most difficult problems we face in the nation. And I think we have a great responsibility. I mean, all Americans have a great responsibility to seek to eliminate discrimination in public and private housing, because so long as you have that, you will never have truly integrated schools, and you will never have a truly integrated society. No section of the country can boast of clean hands in the area of brotherhood. Some sections are better in the sense that they do not have the problem as intensified as other sections, and some sections are better in the sense that they do not have the system legally endorsed as you do in the South. But at least we do find it in all areas of our nation in some form, and this places before all of us a tremendous moral responsibility, because injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
One of the great law cases decided by the Supreme Court of the United States around 1950 was one which made unenforceable restrictive covenants, which made it not unconstitutional but unenforceable in the courts for these covenants to be enforced. And yet, even with this decision, there still is restrictive covenant mindedness. And what we are witnessing now is that the law alone is not sufficient to overcome these sort of fixed attitudes towards people and practices in dealing with people in our American communities.
At the heart of this divide is a simple, unsettling truth. Reform can be managed. Prosecution cannot. Reform allows those in power to remain in control of the story. It offers them the tools to adjust, to amend, to correct, without ever surrendering the foundations beneath their feet. King's Call was demanding, even disruptive, but it still spoke in the language of redemption. It asked America to live up to the words it had already written, to finally honor the promises it had placed on paper. That challenge was difficult but survivable. Malcolm's challenge was something else entirely. He did not assume the system had merely lost its way. He questioned whether it had ever been just to begin with. His words did not ask for better execution of the American idea. They asked whether the idea itself was built on a lie, and more dangerously, whether the world should be invited to judge and intervene. One voice urged America to fulfill its promise. The other asked whether the promise itself was ever meant to be kept, and who should be allowed to judge that failure. That distinction changed everything. One path allowed the system to endure bruised, corrected, but ultimately preserved. The other raised a more unsettling possibility, that the structure was not broken, but built this way. And so history made its choice. One man could be folded into the national story, his words carved into stone, his image softened by reverence, his challenge reframed as patriotism. The other remained unresolved, forever marked as a threat, his message too sharp to canonize, too disruptive to neutralize, because power has a remarkable capacity to absorb criticism that leaves it standing. But it has little tolerance for questions that ask whether it deserves to stand at all. By turning racism in America into an international human rights issue, Malcolm X crossed a line that U.S. institutions could not tolerate. Power doesn't like to be put in the defendant's chair. It prefers the narrative where it corrects itself voluntarily and remains the hero of the story. King's narrative, especially once defanged of its sharpest critiques, could be massaged into such a heroic national story. America faced its sins and redeemed itself. Malcolm's could not. He wasn't asking America to do better. He was asking whether America had the right to lead at all, and that was a question too far. There was another critical difference that influenced how each man's message was received: faith. Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X held different religions. King, an outspoken Christian minister; Malcolm, a prominent Muslim convert, first with the Nation of Islam, later a Sunni Muslim after his pilgrimage to Mecca. In the context of mid-20th century America, this difference profoundly shaped their legibility and moral authority in the eyes of the public.
I need not pause to say how very delighted I am to be here this morning, to have the opportunity of standing in this very great and significant pulpit. And I do want to express my deep personal appreciation to Dean Sayer and all of the cathedral clergy for extending the invitation. It is always a rich and rewarding experience to take a brief break from our day-to-day demands in the struggle for freedom and human dignity and discuss the issues involved in that struggle with concerned friends of goodwill all over our nation. And certainly it is always a deep and meaningful experience to be in a worship service. And so for many reasons, I'm happy to be here today. I would like to use as a subject from which to preach this morning, remaining awake through a great revolution. And the text for the morning is found in the book of Revelation. There are two passages there that I would like to quote. It's in the 16th chapter of that book. Behold, I make all things new. Former things are passed away. I'm sure that most of you have read that arresting little story from the pen of Washington Irving entitled Rip Van Winkle. The one thing that we usually remember about the story is that Rip Van Winkle slept 20 years. But that is another point in that little story that is almost always completely overlooked. It was a sign in the end from which Rip went up in the mountain for his long sleep. When Rip Van Winkle went up in the mountain, the sign had a picture of King George III of England. When he came down 20 years later, the sign had a picture of George Washington, the first president of the United States. And Rip Van Winkle looked up at the picture of George Washington, but in looking at the picture, he was amazed. He was completely lost. He knew not who he was. And this reveals to us that the most striking thing about the story of Rip Van Winkle is not merely that Rip slept 20 years, but that he slept through a revolution. While he was peacefully snoring up in the mountain, a revolution was taking place that at points would change the course of history. And Rip knew nothing about it. He was asleep. Yes, he slept through a revolution. One of the great liabilities of life is that all too many people find themselves living amid a great period of social change, and yet they fail to develop the new attitudes, the new mental responses that the new situation demands. They end up sleeping through a revolution. There can be no gainsaying of the fact that a great revolution has taken place in the world today. In the sense, it is a triple revolution. That is a technological revolution with the impact of automation and cybernation. Then that is a revolution in weaponry with the emergence of atomic and nuclear weapons of warfare. Then that is a human rights revolution with the freedom explosion that has taken place all over the world. Yes, we do live in a period where changes are taking place, and that is still the voice crying through the vista of time, saying, behold, I make all things new. Former things are passed away. Now, whenever anything new comes into history, it brings with it new challenges and new opportunities. And I would like to deal with the challenges that we face today as a result of this triple revolution that has taken place in the world today. First, we are challenged to develop a world perspective. No individual can live alone. No nation can live alone. And anyone who feels that he can live alone is sleeping through a revolution. The world in which we live is geographically one. The challenge that we face today is to make it one in terms of brotherhood. Now, it's true that the geographical oneness of this age has come into being to a large extent through modern man's scientific ingenuity. Modern man, through his scientific genius, has been able to dwarf distance and place time in chains. And our jet planes have compressed into minutes distances that once took weeks and even months. All of this tells us that our world is a neighborhood. Through our scientific and technological genius, we have made of this world a neighborhood, and yet we have not had the ethical commitment to make of it a brotherhood. But somehow and in some way we've got to do this. We must all learn to live together as brothers, or we will all perish together as fools. We are tied together in the single garment of destiny, caught in an inescapable network of mutuality. And whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. For some strange reason, I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be, and you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. This is the way God's universe is made. This is the way it is structured. John Donne caught it years ago and placed it in graphic terms. No man is an island entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. And he goes on toward the end to say, any man's death diminishes me because I am involved in mankind. Therefore never sin to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. We must see this, believe this, and live by it if we are to remain awake through a great revolution.
Christianity has long been America's dominant moral framework. The civil rights movement itself drew heavily on Christian imagery and rhetoric. Churches were meeting points, spirituals and hymns were its soundtrack. King, as a Baptist preacher, spoke in a language familiar to the American mainstream. He invoked biblical themes of deliverance, love, and sacrifice. He framed the struggle against segregation as part of America's sacred obligation and spoke of justice rolling down like waters, quoting the Bible. This positioning made MLK appear as an insider appealing to the nation's conscience. As a Christian minister, he was seen, at least by liberal allies, as morally legitimate. When he spoke, many in power could perceive him as one of us, calling us to be better. Even those who disagreed with his tactics found it harder to dismiss his underlying moral message because it was couched in the shared lexicon of American civil religion. The United States imagines itself as a sort of redeemer nation, with presidents swearing oaths on Bibles and political speeches often invoking God's blessing. King's Christianity fit neatly into that narrative. It made him quotable, teachable, and canonizable. His faith was a common reference point that could soften how his radical demands were received. It draped him in the cloth of a tradition that the majority revered.
And I wonder if Mr. Blake might start it off by asking Mr. Shabazz a question.
Minister Malcolm, the thing that I thought might be good for starting it off is to talk about one of the most pervasive beliefs in the general society about the Nation of Islam, and that is that it is an organization dedicated to the use of violent means to attain its goals. The question I have is, how true is this, and why do you think it persists in society?
Well, the Muslims who have accepted the religion of Islam and follow the religious guidance of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad have never bombed any churches, have never murdered any little girls, as was done in Birmingham, have never lynched anybody, have never at any time been guilty of initiating any aggressive acts of violence during the entire 33 years or more that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad has been teaching us. The charge of violence against us actually stems from the guilt complex that exists in the conscious and subconscious minds of most white people in this country. They know that they've been violent in their brutality against Negroes, and they feel that someday the Negro is going to wake up and try and do unto them as they have do unto the whites as the whites have done unto us. We aren't a violent group. We are taught by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad to obey the law, to respect everyone who respects us. We're taught to display courtesy, to be polite. But we're also taught that at any time anyone in any way inflicts or seeks to inflict violence upon us, we are within our religious rights to retaliate in self-defense to the maximum degree of our ability. We never initiate any violence upon anyone, but if anyone attacks us, we reserve the right to defend ourselves. So to accuse us of being violent is like accusing a man who is being lynched, who is being hung on a tree, simply because he struggles vigorously against his lyncher. The victim is accused of violence, but the lyncher is never accused of violence. And I only point this out because the various racist groups that are set up in this country by whites and who have actually practiced violence against blacks for 400 years are never associated or identified or made synonymous with the term violence. But whites speak of Muslims almost synonymously with violence. Whenever Muslims are mentioned by them, violence is brought up. But it's not connected with any other group. This is a sort of a propaganda tactic, or what I would call psychological warfare, to in some way make the image of the Muslims in this country be a violent image rather than a religious image.
I'd like to ask a question in that regard. What's interesting is that members of the Nation of Islam have not used violence even when black Americans were attacked. How do you account for this? Does this in any way contradict some of the basic premises of your movement?
I don't know how you mean.
Well, you maintain, for example, that you will not or that you should not use violence unless you are attacked by the white man. And I think we can note in the last several years, certainly, dozens and dozens and dozens of instances in which Negroes have been attacked, killed in some instances.
You mean in these demonstrations?
These demonstrations and the bombings, for example, recently in Birmingham where they killed 4 little Negro girls. And what interests me is the fact is that the Nation of Islam has not done anything to retaliate.
I think you should be happy.
The important thing is, does your lack of action contradict any of your basic principles?
I'll explain it. You should be happy that Muslims who follow the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, number one, don't believe in any form of integration, and who believe that every mention of the word integration by whites, whether it be from the mouth of Kennedy on down to the mouth of the lowest, raggediest white liberal in the street who is beatnik-like involving himself in these integration efforts, if we believed in it, we would integrate, and we would fight anybody who got in our way or made any effort whatsoever to stop us from integrating. If we really believed that the law of the land, the Supreme Court, and other so-called judicial bodies were for real when they talked about integration, we would integrate. And knowing that the law was on our side, and any effort we made to demonstrate toward integration, why, we would know the law should be on our side, if it's the law of the land. If it is the law of the land, then the demonstrators are within the law, and the discriminators are against the law. But to show you the hypocrisy of the law, when Negroes demonstrate for integration, instead of arresting the discriminators, the law arrests the demonstrators. So this is a foolish move on the part of Negroes. And when you foolishly get yourself involved with an enemy, then whatever comes upon you, that's your business. As Muslims, we believe that separation is the best way and the only sensible way, not integration. And but on the other hand, when we see our people being brutalized by white bigots, white racists, we think that they are foolish to allow themselves to be beaten and brutalized and do nothing whatsoever to protect themselves. They are foolish. They should have the right to defend themselves against any attack made against them by anyone. If a dog is biting a black man, the black man should kill the dog. Whether the dog is a police dog, a hound dog, or any kind of dog. If a dog is sick on a black man, when that black man is doing nothing but trying to take advantage of what the government says is supposed to be his, then that black man should kill that dog or any two-legged dog who sicks the dog on it.
Should other black men help that particular person who was attacked?
I think you'll find, sir, that there will come a time when black people wake up and become intellectually independent enough to think for themselves, as other humans are intellectually independent enough to think for themselves. Then the black man will think like a black man, and he will feel for other black people. And this new thinking and feeling will cause black people to stick together. And then at that point, you'll have a situation where when you attack one black man, you are attacking all black men. And this type of black thinking will cause all black people to stick together. And this type of thinking also will bring an end to the brutality inflicted upon black people by white people. And it is the only thing that will bring an end to it. No federal court, state court, or city court will bring an end to it. It's something that the black man has to bring an end to himself.
Malcolm X's religious context was entirely different. He rose to prominence in the Nation of Islam, a religious movement many white Americans viewed with suspicion or outright hostility. In the 1950s and 60s, Islam was, to the American public, a largely foreign religion, often associated with distant lands or with the black nationalist followers of Elijah Muhammad, whom the press derided as a black supremacist. Islam was not part of the mainstream American story in the way Christianity was. In fact, to many, it was seen as un-American and radical by definition. Malcolm's embrace of Islam gave him a moral framework outside the Judeo-Christian heritage of most Americans. He quoted the Quran, spoke of Allah, and challenged the moral authority of Christian and Jewish leaders who could preach brotherhood on Sunday while upholding segregation the rest of the week. This mattered enormously. It meant Malcolm X did not have the built-in familiarity that King enjoyed. He spoke from outside the nation's moral mythos, not within it. There was no quick way for the American majority to identify with Malcolm's spiritual perspective. Instead, many saw it as other, perhaps even antagonistic. The press frequently emphasized Malcolm's Muslim identity to exoticize him or paint him as inherently extreme. By contrast, King's religious title Reverend was often foregrounded to emphasize his righteousness.
There's great interest in the fact that you have joined the Muslim religion. How long have you had this interest, Cassius?
Oh, for the past 6 years, I would say, after hearing a lot of teachings on Negro history and who we were before we got here, and 1 and 1 makes 2.
You feel your affiliation with the Muslim religion, being a follower of the Muslim religion, had something to do with your winning the championship?
Well, I would say so. My religion is the only thing that I can give me credit for pulling me through, because 99 out of 100 seemed to see no possibility of me winning. The newspaper reporters and everybody all over the world condemned me. They said it would be a mismatch, and nobody believe it. So my prayers to Allah and faith in my religion, living a clean, righteous life, I have to say that's what pulled me through.
Malcolm X, I want to talk with you briefly about your affiliation with Cassius. How long have you known him?
About 3 years.
And have you been advising him as far as his religious affiliations are concerned?
Well, no, I don't give advice to anyone. He's my brother and my friend. I express what I know and understand around him, but he has a mind of his own and understanding of it.
Faith shaped not only their language, but their sense of obligation to God, to people, and to history. King's Christianity taught endurance. It emphasized forgiveness, restraint, the discipline of turning the other cheek. His nonviolence was not passive, it was devotional, a moral strategy rooted in the belief that suffering, willingly borne, could awaken the conscience of a nation that still imagined itself Christian. Malcolm's spiritual path led him elsewhere, especially after leaving the Nation of Islam and embracing a broader global Islam. His faith sharpened his commitment to truth and justice even when those truths required confrontation. Islam gave Malcolm a wider horizon. He spoke of the Ummah, a worldwide community bound not by nationality or race, but by shared opposition to oppression. In that vision, Africans, Arabs, Asians, and the dispossessed of every continent were connected, not by citizenship, but by struggle.
Malcolm, on your trip abroad, you said you sensed a feeling of great brotherhood, and that conceivably you would be working toward integration in this country now. At least this is what you're reported to have said. Have you any comment on it?
I don't think that I ever mentioned anything about working toward integration. If I recall, I pointed out that while I was at Mecca making the pilgrimage, I spoke about the brotherhood that existed at all levels and among all people who were there on that Hajj, who had accepted the religion of Islam. And I pointed out that for what it had done, what the religion of Islam had done for those people over there, despite their complexion differences, that it would probably do America well to study the religion of Islam, and perhaps it could drive some of the racism from this society as it has driven racism from the Muslim society.
Drive is aiming for this goal?
Well, I can't say that the current integration drive is aiming for that goal because it hasn't realized the goal in any state. They haven't even got integration right here in New York City. You have worse integration problems in the North than they have in the South. So if it doesn't work if you can't bring about integration in New York City as international, cosmopolitan, up-to-date as it's supposed to be, you will never get integration anywhere else in the country.
Malcolm, have your experiences with white-skinned Muslims in Africa and the Middle East made you feel that relations between Negroes and whites who are not Muslims is any more possible?
When I was on the pilgrimage, I had close contact with Muslims whose skin would in America be classified as white, and with Muslims who themselves would be classified as white in America. But these particular Muslims didn't call themselves white. They looked upon themselves as human beings, as part of the human family, and therefore they looked upon all other segments of the human family as part of that same family. Well, now, they had a different look or a different air or a different attitude than that which is reflected in the attitude of the man in America who calls himself white. So I said that if Islam had done that for them, perhaps if the white man in America would study Islam, perhaps it could do the same thing for him.
I think what a lot of people are interested in, Malcolm, is whether this experience has made you feel that your feelings have changed, that the animosity you have expressed in the past toward all whites.
There's one thing that I want to make clear. No matter how much respect, no matter how much recognition whites show toward me, as far as I'm concerned, as long as that same respect and recognition is not shown toward every one of our people in this country, it doesn't exist for me.
This shift gave Malcolm a moral authority that did not depend on American approval. He was no longer arguing within the nation's own moral vocabulary. He was not quoting the U.S. Constitution. He was invoking the Quran. He was invoking the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. His appeal did not rise from American institutions, but from standards that stood outside them and above them. That made him difficult to absorb. Malcolm was not asking America to repent in the familiar language of Christian redemption. He was asking it to be judged by a God beyond American Christendom and by peoples the nation did not recognize as moral arbiters. In a moment when Christianity functioned as a kind of civic religion, that posture was not merely uncomfortable, it was transgressive. And once again, Malcolm stood outside the story America preferred to tell, speaking in a moral register it could not easily translate, and therefore could not easily forgive. In practical terms, Christianity helped position King as an acceptable interlocutor to those in power. King met with President Lyndon B. Johnson and other national leaders, and they could pray together or speak the common language of biblical ethics. Malcolm X, meanwhile, was under surveillance by the FBI and seen as representing a foreign ideology. There were no invitations to the White House for him. One was seen as a moral insider, the other as a moral outsider. The difference isn't about the true merits of either faith, of course, but about perception in America. King's Christianity framed him as one of us, familiar and thus containable, whereas Malcolm's Islam made him illegible and uncontainable to mainstream America. This is not to suggest that King's path was gentle. Many Christians opposed him, nor is it to say that Malcolm's faith weakened him. It sharpened him. It gave him clarity, discipline, and a sense of belonging beyond American approval. But memory is not neutral. In the long arc of public remembrance, King's identity as a Christian minister has been elevated, reshaped into a prophet of American values, a figure who could be claimed as proof of national goodness. Malcolm's identity as a Muslim, meanwhile, has been used to push him to the margins, framed as evidence of foreignness, agitation, and threat. Faith shaped how each man could be received. One belief system rendered its messenger intelligible to power. The other marked its messenger as alien. And in the way America remembers them who it sanctifies and who it keeps at a distance, it becomes clear that this difference was never invisible.
Tonight, Front Page Challenge welcomes the outspoken Negro leader, Malcolm X.
Sir, what's the real reason why you two men split? Is it merely ideological or is it personality? What else?
Probably personality. It was not the statement that originally was given by the movement when we split. It's more personality than anything else.
You've called people like Martin Luther King, who just got a Nobel Peace Prize, an Uncle Tom. Is this correct, first?
Well, I'd rather say that in the States, there's a law that has recently been passed, or a decision handed down by the court, wherein if you call someone an Uncle Tom, they can sue you for libel.
Well,
so I never refer to them as Uncle Tom's. I would say that Uncle Martin is my friend.
Uncle Martin is your friend, yet you would disagree with his approach to what he wants to accomplish.
Definitely. If his approach would bring about what the black man in America needs to completely eliminate the problem that we have, I would say well and good. But I very much doubt that anyone who adopts the approach that Martin Luther King has been teaching to our people in that country can point to any meaningful gains that has actually served to solve the problem.
Black Muslims have sometimes, whether you have or not, and I think probably you have sometimes, it seemed to me, been preaching hate to meet hate.
I don't advocate any kind of hate.
But there's a lot of talk that sounds very much like it.
No, I think that the guilt complex of the American white man is so profound until when you begin to analyze the real condition of the black man in America, instead of the American white man eliminating the causes that create that condition, he tries to cover it up by accusing his accusers of teaching hate. But actually, they're just exposing him for being responsible for what exists.
Well, that's something of an argument, but I've heard speeches made by some of the people of your group. I think I've heard you make speeches. It seemed to me that you were advocating what I would have to describe, I think, as violence to meet the serious injuries that have been done your people, with which I totally agree.
I don't call that violence. I don't in any way encourage black people to go out and initiate acts of aggression indiscriminately against whites. But I do believe that the black man in the United States and any human being, anywhere, is well within his right to do whatever is necessary, by any means necessary, to protect his life and property, especially in a country where the federal government itself has proven that it is either unable or unwilling to protect the lives and property of those human beings.
Just before Pierre takes it, you've got a pretty good fighter and the world's heavyweight champion lined up with you to help out. Yes, Pierre.
Well, Mr. X, if I guess I call you that, is that the proper appellation? Yes. Mr. X, I'm wondering if you still believe, as I think you certainly did at the time you were allied to the black Muslim movement, in a segregated black nation in North America.
I don't believe in any form of segregation or any form of racism. I'm against any form of segregation and against racism.
Am I right in saying that the black Muslim movement, which you have left, did believe in that?
Well, Elijah Muhammad taught his followers that the only solution was a separate state for black people. And as long as I thought he genuinely believed that himself, I believed in him and believed in his solution. But when I began to doubt that he himself believed that that was feasible, and I saw no kind of action designed to bring it into existence or bring it about, then I turned in a different direction.
Are you still a Muslim yourself?
Oh, yes. I'm a Muslim. I believe in the religion of Islam, which believes in brotherhood, complete brotherhood of all people. But at the same time that I believe in this brotherhood, I don't believe in forcing my desire for brotherhood upon those who aren't willing to accept it.
Of course, I think the Christians would say that they also believed in brotherhood. What did you say to that?
I'd say they believe in it, but don't practice it.
Well, that'd be a pretty good answer.
Sir, when the muezzin goes up in the minaret twice a day, he cries to the world, there is but one God, and he is Allah. Do you deny that there is a Christian God?
The muezzin does this 5 times a day.
5 times, and I only heard him twice.
Well, you were fortunate to hear him twice. But he does this 5 times a day, and the same God that he says that he expresses the existence of is the God that the Christians profess to believe in themselves, and the God that the Jews believe in. One God, the creator of the universe. The Muslims believe in the God that created the universe, and I think the Christians do, and the Jews do. Now, as long as all of them are talking about the creator, the Jews may call him Jehovah, and Christians may have another name for him. Those who are Arabic speaking refer to him as Allah. Well, we believe in the same God.
Now, as the Muslim religion advances in the United States, are you modernizing it or sticking with the old faiths? For example, the complete segregation of the sexes.
I think that everything today on this earth is being modernized. Religious principles and practices, as well as political and other things.
Now, when you went to Mecca, this is a very sacred and forbidden city. I tried to get to Mecca myself and certainly didn't make it, not being a Muslim. But how would they accept you as one? You're an American. There are few American Muslims.
This is true, and by being an American and not having not being able to speak the Arabic language, I did strike a snag, a very serious snag, but I was fortunate to have been pretty well known by the officials in Arabia, and they knew too that I had accepted Orthodox Islam. It had been highly publicized in the paper, and I became a guest of the state. I was a guest of Prince Faisal, the present King Faisal, and they made it possible for me to go before the committee, Hajj committee or Hajj court, who examines you and asks you questions about your belief, and if you pass it, then you are okay to go to Mecca. But it's
you would
true.
have to have a translator then.
I had one. Then realizing that our problem in America, that we are black Americans, and we have a problem that goes beyond religion, we formed a group known as the Organization of Afro-American Unity. And the objective of this organization, it's non-religious, number one. Any Negro can belong to it. And the objective of that organization is to bring about a condition that will guarantee respect and recognition of the 22 million black Americans as human beings. We feel that the problem, number one, of the black man in America is beyond America's ability to solve. It's a human problem, not an American problem or a Negro problem. And as a human problem or a world problem, we feel that it should be taken out of the jurisdiction of the United States government and the United States courts and taken into the United Nations in the same manner that the problems of the black man in South Africa, Angola, and other parts of the world, and even the way they're trying to bring the problems of the Jews in Russia into the United Nations because of violation of human rights. We believe that our problem is one not a violation of civil rights, but a violation of human rights. Not only are we denied the right to be a citizen in the United States, we're denied the right to be a human being.
Well, Mr. X, may I thank you very much for coming on our program and perhaps clearing away some of the cobwebs of misconception that some of us might have had about your belief. And I think you're a very sincere man, and it takes a lot of courage to admit a former belief is wrong, and we congratulate you for that and the service you performed tonight in giving us your views. Thank you so much, Mr.
Thank you.
This divide becomes hardest to ignore when the conversation turns outward, toward global conflict. Few issues draw the line between acceptable dissent and forbidden critique more clearly than questions of international solidarity, especially Israel and Palestine. For decades, it has been a quiet test of which moral positions can be spoken aloud in American life, and which cannot. In that way, foreign policy shapes memory. Some views move through institutions without much resistance. They're repeated, reinforced, made familiar. Others immediately raise suspicion, they're labeled reckless or extreme, and slowly pushed out of the story we're allowed to tell. What remains isn't the full picture, it's the version that fits. And dissent usually doesn't disappear all at once. It fades through edits, through omissions, through softening, until what once challenged power is remembered only in the forms power can live with.
The whole world must see that Israel must exist and has a right to exist and is one of the great outposts of democracy in the world.
My Jewish brothers and sisters said to me amid anti-Semitism anywhere, we don't need your support. We have enough Jewish power to deal with this problem ourselves. I would still take a stand against anti-Semitism because it's wrong, it's unjust, and it's evil. If my Catholic brothers and sisters said to me, amid bigotry toward Catholics, we don't need your support in this because we have enough Catholic power to deal with it, I would still take a stand against bigotry toward Catholics because it is wrong, it is evil, and it is unjust.
When I was the rabbi of the Jewish community in Berlin under the Hitler regime, I learned many things. The most important thing that I learned in my life, and under those tragic circumstances, is that bigotry and hatred are not the most urgent problems. The most urgent, the most disgraceful, the most shameful, and the most tragic problem is silence. A great people which had created a great civilization had become a nation of silent onlookers. They remained silent in the face of hate, in the face of brutality, and in the face of mass murder.
Perhaps if there had been a broader understanding of the uses of nonviolent direct action in Germany when Hitler was rising and consolidating his power, the brutal extermination of 6 million Jews and millions of other war dead might have been averted, and Germany might never have become totalitarian if Protestants and Catholics had engaged in nonviolent direct action and had made the oppression of the Jews their very own oppression, and had come into the streets beside the Jew to scrub the sidewalks, and had Gentiles worn the stigmatizing yellow armbands by the millions, a unique form of mass resistance to the Nazi regime might have developed. I'm fully aware of the terror, the intimidation, the brutality, and the force the fascists were so quick to use. But I am also aware that in the South today, some races of the same mentality have been curbed in their resistance to nonviolent action when practiced on a mass scale. Today, people all over the world should be engaging in mass action to protest anti-Semitism in the Soviet Union. That is a dangerous silence today which unintentionally encourages evil to flourish. Was Albert Einstein right when he said, "The world is in greater peril from those who tolerate evil than from those who actively commit it. Did not President Kennedy warn that those who do nothing are inviting shame as well as violence? Will the nation ever forget the searing impact of Rabbi Joachim Prince's admonition as he spoke at the March on Washington in 1963? When I was a rabbi of the Jewish community in Berlin under the Hitler regime, I learned many things. The most important thing that I learned in my life and under tragic circumstances is that bigotry and hatred are not the most urgent problems. The most urgent, the most disgraceful, the most shameful, and the most tragic problem is silence. A great people which had created a great civilization had become a nation of silent onlookers. They remain silent in the face of hate, in the face of brutality, and in the face of mass murder.
Dr. King came of age in a world shaped by the aftermath of World War II, a moment when moral lines felt newly drawn and alliances were framed as safeguards against repeating unspeakable horrors. In that era, support for the state of Israel was widely understood as an extension of opposing anti-Semitism and defending democracy against the shadow of totalitarianism. King spoke from within that moral landscape. In 1967, shortly after the Six-Day War, King stated Israel must exist and has the right to exist, and is one of the great outposts of democracy in the world. He went on to say, "Peace for Israel means security, and we must stand with all our might to protect its right to exist." At the time, these words sounded steady, almost inevitable. The Holocaust was still a living memory, its lessons raw and unresolved. In mainstream American discourse, Israel was seen as a fragile democracy surrounded by hostility, a moral ally in an unstable region. To stand with Israel was, for many, to stand on the right side of history. King's position fit comfortably within that frame. It aligned with U.S. foreign policy and Cold War logic, allowing injustice to be named in ways American institutions already recognized: segregation at home, fascism, and anti-Semitism abroad. These were moral evils the nation felt safe condemning without having to interrogate its own geopolitical power or strategic interests. Publicly, at least, King's language of global justice remained within that shared moral consensus. He spoke of human brotherhood, of peace, of cooperation, of a broad, principled opposition to colonialism without directly challenging the architecture of American leadership in the world, and that mattered, because it meant King's vision could be honored without discomfort, quoted in classrooms, invoked in political halls, and celebrated without risk. Supporting his moral framework did not require American leaders to question their alliances, their influence, or the fundamentals of U.S. global authority. His words traveled easily through power, familiar, resonant, and safe enough to remember.
The Palestinian struggle is not just a cry for justice. It's a blistering battle for the most fundamental human rights that every living soul on this planet should inherit by birthright. It's an unyielding resistance against the oppressive, suffocating grip of occupation and the callous denial of the most basic human dignity. Just as the civil rights movement in the United States fought against the chains of racial discrimination, so too do the Palestinian people strive to shatter the chains of occupation and tyranny. Never forget, my friends, that the Palestinians, much like African Americans in the United States, have been subjected to a heart-wrenching history of suffering and torment. The birth of Israel in 1948 brought forth the mass expulsion and dispossession of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians from their ancestral homes and land. This is a historic injustice that continues to haunt the lives of Palestinians to this very day. The situation in Palestine serves as a brutal reminder of the consequences of colonialism and the ruthless dispossession of indigenous peoples. It is an agonizing reminder that the fight for justice knows no borders, and we must stand united in solidarity with all oppressed peoples, whether they reside in the United States, South Africa, or anywhere around the world. Let's be unequivocally clear. Advocating for the rights of the Palestinian people is not synonymous with denying the rights and security of the Jewish people. The fight for justice in Palestine is not an assault on any particular group, but an unwavering stand against the policies of a Zionist state that has for far too long stripped Palestinians of their rights. We must remember that numerous Jewish voices also resound in the calls for justice and peace in Palestine, and their voices must not be silenced. In our relentless pursuit of justice for the Palestinian people, we must also acknowledge that it is in the best interest of the entire world to seek a just and enduring solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It is a pursuit in the name of peace, stability, and the dignity of all mankind. But let me underscore this. The battle for justice in Palestine is not merely a political struggle, it's an elemental moral battle. It's the fight for the most basic human rights of a people who have suffered these injustices for far too long. It's the fight for the right to exist in peace and security, free from the ceaseless specter of violence and dispossession. If you're not careful, the newspapers will have you hating the people who are being oppressed and loving the people who are doing the oppressing. I implore every person of conscience, regardless of their origins or beliefs, to stand steadfast with the Palestinian people in their unwavering quest for justice by any means necessary. Let us unite in building a world where every soul can live in freedom and dignity, where the rights of every individual are not just respected, but celebrated. The struggle for justice in Palestine is a universal fight, a resonating echo of the battles waged by oppressed people across the globe. It's a battle we must champion, a torch we must carry, and a legacy we must honor. Thank you, and free Palestine.
Malcolm X moved in the opposite direction. Where consensus offered safety, he pressed against it most sharply on questions of Palestine and Zionism. His travels through Africa and the Middle East reshaped his understanding of power, revealing patterns that felt unmistakably familiar. What he saw abroad echoed what he had known at home. Domination wearing different faces but driven by the same logic. To Malcolm, these struggles were not separate. The condition of Black Americans, the dispossession of Palestinians, the subjugation of African nations, these were chapters of a single story, and he spoke accordingly. In 1964, after visiting a Palestinian refugee camp in Gaza, Malcolm wrote an essay titled Zionist Logic. It was unsparing. In it, he argued that Zionism had masked a new form of colonialism behind the language of benevolence. He warned newly independent African nations not to mistake aid for solidarity, cautioning that assistance often arrived carrying imperial interests beneath the surface. Malcolm named what others avoided. He described Zionism as a colonial project no different in intent from European imperialism, another mechanism for controlling land, people, and political futures. In his analysis, the displacement of Palestinians was not an anomaly, but part of the same Western system that had enslaved Africans and marginalized Black Americans. This was not abstract critique, it was lived recognition. And in the United States then as now, where political loyalty to Israel was treated as unquestionable, Malcolm's words landed like a rupture. They were not just controversial, they were intolerable, because he wasn't asking for balance. He wasn't offering diplomatic language. He drew together the threads power worked so hard to divide, insisting that justice cannot survive once it is rationed. To be clear, Malcolm X's position did not grow out of anti-Jewish hatred. He condemned anti-Semitism as firmly as he condemned all forms of racism. What shaped his view was not prejudice, but an anti-colonial lens. He saw Palestinians as fellow people of color living under domination, part of the same global pattern he had witnessed in Africa, Asia, and Black America. But in the United States, the conversation around Israel and Palestine has long been tightly managed. Across media, government, and academia, the boundaries of acceptable speech have been carefully drawn. Criticism of Zionism has often been treated not as political disagreement, but as something inherently suspect, sometimes even recast as hatred itself. That climate mattered. In the 1960s, Malcolm's open solidarity with Arab and Muslim causes pushed him far outside what many Americans were willing to tolerate. His analysis did not fit neatly into Cold War moral frameworks, and it did not flatter American power. And even decades later, revisiting those critiques still touches a nerve. There is a lesson in that contrast. Supporting King's broad call for equality can earn reverence, a holiday, a monument, a place in the national story. Supporting Malcolm's internationalist critique, especially when it extends to American foreign policy or Zionism, has more often led to distance, suspicion, or silence. Some moral positions move smoothly through institutions, others set off alarms, and the difference between them reveals less about the justice of the ideas than about what power is willing to hear. The result is that Malcolm's internationalism made him far more threatening to the status quo. King's moral vision, at least the version preserved in public memory, moves easily through American institutions because it does not require a reckoning with U.S. foreign policy. It challenges injustice, but within boundaries power knows how to manage. Malcolm crossed those boundaries. You can honor King without indicting America's role in the world. You cannot honestly honor Malcolm X without confronting his broader accusation against global white supremacy, against empire, and against America's place within that system. And that difference matters. It explains the imbalance in how they are remembered. Institutions gravitate toward the voice that leaves certain foundations intact. They resist the one that questions whether those foundations were ever just to begin with. King's message could be absorbed. Malcolm's knocked on pillars still fiercely protected, and power, when faced with that choice, has always made its preference clear. In summary, memory is not just about truth, it's about risk. King's positions, as remembered, pose little risk to the machinery of American global interests. Malcolm's positions, if remembered in full, would pose a challenge. So memory has been selective. One man's global vision is celebrated as part of a noble fight for human dignity. The other's global vision is often swept under the rug. This selective memory isn't a conspiracy, it's an organic outcome of how power operates. Some ideas are simply too combustible to place on pedestals in Washington, D.C. Thus, the architecture of acceptable dissent allows King's image safe passage, while Malcolm's is stopped at the gate, labeled too dangerous and too foreign. Up to now, we've discussed how and why one leader's legacy was softened and promoted while the other's was marginalized. But it's crucial to understand that this didn't happen by accident. Power not only silences dissent, it also curates representation. In other words, the establishment actively participates in deciding which black voices and which messages get amplified to speak for Black America. This is the machinery of misrepresentation at work, a process Malcolm X himself warned about repeatedly.
But in 1964, the black people should band together and do something about selecting and electing representatives, black representatives, politically, who have the rights and the best interests of the black people at heart, and that we should also unite together and sweep out of office all of the black political puppets who are used by the white power structure to continue white supremacy in our communities.
In that regard, would you include Congressman Dawson, for example, from Chicago, and some of the people who represent him on the Chicago City Council?
In which regard?
In the area of acting as a puppet.
I don't know what Mr. Muhammad's opinion is of Congressman Dawson. They both live right there in the city of Chicago together. I don't know what his opinion is of Congressman Dawson. I'm suspicious of any Negro, be he politician, be he clergyman, or civic leader who is constantly patted on the back by whites. I have a tendency to lead toward the Negro politician who is constantly condemned by the white power structure. This is my thought pattern. I'm giving you an insight of it.
You, though, mentioned Mr. Lynn and saying you'd like to know who his white friends are. Now, I'm wondering if you didn't make a contradictory statement in Muslim terms by using white and friend in the same phrase. That is
I
to
use
say,
friend in quotes.
I see. In other words, if a black man cannot have a white man as a friend.
He may have a white man who's friendly, but being friendly and being a friend, I think, are two different things. I think there are many whites who act friendly toward Negroes. A fox acts friendly toward the lamb. And usually the fox is the one who ends up with the lamb chop on his plate. The wolf doesn't act friendly, and therefore the wolf has more difficulty in getting the lamb chop in his plate.
I'd like to point out, though, that...
And I say that because it is usually if you study the structure of the Negro community, economically, politically, civically, psychologically, and otherwise, it's controlled by the white liberal, who usually poses as the friend of the Negro, who actually differs from the white conservative in the same way that the fox differs from the wolf. Their appetite is the same. Their motives are the same. It's only their mannerisms and methods that differ.
I would agree that no doubt there have been a large number of whites who have posed as liberals and as friends of the Negro and who have time and again betrayed the Negro. On the other hand, I think one could point to a large number of whites who have struggled for civil rights, for equality, and have got little or nothing out of it, other than quite a few bruises.
Give me an example.
Well, the large number of white students who have gone into the South, for example, working for SNCC and other organizations.
Not working for SNCC or other organizations, but working for the white political machines who benefit by the voting efforts of Negroes.
Okay. I'll be more specific. I would cite Herbert Hill, for example, as a kind of person who has championed Negro job rights, for example, in New York City and elsewhere. He has fought the political machine.
First time I met Herbert Hill personally was when they were picketing to stop the working on the Harlem Hospital in Harlem. Negroes for 10 years had to fight the city to get an annex built on the Harlem Hospital. Because in Harlem, we need a hospital more so than anything else. Our people are sick. Plus, we do a lot of cutting and shooting of each other, though we profess to be nonviolent. And Herbert Hill brought his forces out and stopped the working on that site. This is the first time I ever saw him. Then, when work was brought to a halt on a hospital in Harlem, the same Negroes tried to stop the work at the Downstate Medical Center in Brooklyn, which is predominantly white. They were out there for 3 months during the summer. Couldn't stop anything. And I never saw Herbert Hill out there one time. Now, whenever it takes a stoppage of something that's going to affect the white man, you find the white liberal absent. But when it involves something that primarily will affect the best interests of black people and black people only, then that white liberal is present. Herbert Hill is the labor secretary for the NAACP. Mm-hmm. And if he was interested in black people, he would prepare a black man with the type of knowledge and understanding of the labor troubles involving black people that would enable a black man to sit in the same position as Secretary of Labor or Labor Secretary in the NAACP. I'm suspicious of whites who join Negroes and always have to be in the lead, who always have to be the head, who always have to be at the top in Negro organizations. Those whites who really have the interest of blacks at heart, let them give some advice to some Negroes and stand on the sideline. But don't join the organization and then get at the head of it and pose as a friend of Negroes.
Well, I would defend his sincerity and his commitment. And more than that, I would say that just because a person is a Negro or a black American does not mean that he's going to struggle for Negro rights or for jobs for Negroes or anything else. I think that today you could point to a large number of Negro leaders who have consistently betrayed Negroes in a whole host of areas.
They aren't really Negro leaders. These are puppets that have been put in front of the Negro community by white liberals. These are parrots that have been put in front of the Negro community by white liberals. You can't name me a Negro leader who has been betrayed Negroes, who has not been endorsed, sanctioned, subsidized, and supported by the white liberals.
Minister Malcolm, I'd like to...
Well, I could cite one example would be Congressman Dawson, for example, in Chicago. In Chicago, a large number of liberals located in the Hyde Park district have consistently fought Dawson and his betrayals of the Negro, and they've also fought some of the people who represent Dawson on the Chicago City Council.
The only Negro I know who is constantly fought, only Negro politician that I know who is constantly fought by white liberals is Adam Clayton Powell. Mm-hmm. And they call him a racist because he speaks so bluntly on the race issue. But I'm not, as I said, not too familiar with Dawson and his work.
Now, Minister Malcolm, in our textbook, which the students have read, supposedly, there is a statement, which is a quotation from Essien and essentially that from Lincoln, to the effect that the Nation of Islam does not have a great deal of support in the Negro community in this country by and large. And a recent national poll of American Negroes found that leaders and rank and file, according to their statistics, supported the Reverend Martin Luther King somewhere over 90%, whereas the support and favorable rating that they gave Minister Muhammad was less than 20%, and somewhere around 45% of them gave an unfavorable rating to Mr. Muhammad. What would your response be in terms of Baldwin's statement that this is a growing thing and the kinds of evidence that we have that there is much to it?
Well, that statement I just made concerning the Constitution is Article 1, Section 2 in the Constitution, where it classifies us as chattel. Baldwin did point out that Mr. Muhammad has the only grassroots support and is the only one whose whole following operates or functions on a mass vehicle. And I think Baldwin told Dr. Kenneth Clark that Martin Luther King is at the end of his rope. Now, concerning the poll taken by Newsweek magazine, I think you said that this was the leaders who said that, who went with King and against Mr. Muhammad around 90%. I just told you a little while ago, these leaders that they call leaders, this included Lena Horne, this included Dick Gregory, and this included comedians, comics, trumpet players, baseball players. Show me in the white community where a comedian is a white leader. Show me in the white community where a singer is a white leader, or a dancer or a trumpet player is a white leader. These aren't leaders. These are puppets and clowns that have been set up over the white community and over the black community by the white community and have been made celebrities and usually say exactly what they know that the white man wants to hear. And it is an honor, actually, that they endorsed Dr. Martin Luther King and were against the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. That's actually an honor. Now, when you say that they also, in this same Newsweek poll magazine, I think the pollster said that he went into the Negro community and asked about the Muslims. And many Negroes whom he asked said, well, I never heard of the Muslims. Who are they? You know,
this is the rank and file we're talking about.
Oh, yeah. Now, when they got down to the rank and file, this was the answers that they got. This is the equivalent to the situation in Kenya during the Mau Mau uprising, when many frightened whites in Kenya, Africa, would go among the Africans and ask them, what about the Mau Mau? And the African would say, I never heard of them. And the same white man who would ask the African this question and very naively believe what the African said, when he went to bed that night, he would lose his head. And usually the one who took his head was the same African who told him that afternoon he had never heard of the Mau Mau.
Except in the Newsweek poll, they used Negro interviewers.
You'll find that oftentimes Negroes are as much on guard around Negro interviewers, who usually represent the bourgeois element of Negroes, as they are on guard around whites. Usually Negroes know that when this bourgeois Negro walks through the door, he is not doing something that he's initiated himself, but he's involved in something in which the white man is the absolute author of and has sent him to the Negro community for some information. And when they give that Negro some information, usually they give him the information that they want him to take back to the white man, because that's who he's going to take it back to.
Malcolm was deeply aware of how leadership was assigned, how certain black voices were elevated, not by communities, but by institutions that felt safer choosing their own representatives. In a speech in 1963, he questioned the premise outright. He asked why entertainers and celebrities were so often presented as political leaders for black people. Show me in the white community where a comedian is a white leader, he said, where a singer or a dancer or a trumpet player is treated as a leader. His point was simple and unsettling. These figures, he argued, were not elevated because they challenged power, but because they were unlikely to do so. They were celebrated precisely because they were familiar, charismatic, and predictable, because they knew, consciously or not, what the audience in power wanted to hear. What Malcolm exposed was a pattern. Rather than contend with radical voices rising from the ground, voices shaped by organizing, sacrifice, and lived consequence, institutions often preferred substitutes, figures who came pre-packaged with fame, who translated struggle into spectacle, who softened urgency into something more palatable. These chosen voices were given platforms, interviews, applause. Meanwhile, organizers without celebrity were sidelined. Uncompromising activists were dismissed as angry, unrealistic, or dangerous. Malcolm understood this not as coincidence, but as strategy. Control the messengers, and you can manage the message. Anoint the voices that reassure, and marginalize the ones that demand change. And in naming that dynamic, Malcolm once again placed himself outside the boundaries of what power was willing to tolerate, refusing to perform, refusing to be assigned, and insisting that liberation could not be outsourced to figures chosen for their harmlessness. He likened it to mixing cream into coffee. If the brew became too dark, too strong, too uncompromising, power would dilute it. Add something smoother, more palatable, something that could be consumed without changing the taste of the room. What Malcolm understood was that power doesn't only silence the voices it fears, it also selects the voices it can tolerate and amplifies those instead. That form of control is quieter, more refined, and far more effective. It creates the appearance of representation while carefully managing its limits. The audience sees faces that look like diversity, hears words that sound like progress, and never notices how narrow the range of acceptable thought has become. As Malcolm once put it, the black leaders most celebrated in mainstream spaces were often those who say exactly what they know the white man wants to hear. Not because they were malicious, but because the system rewarded reassurance, not disruption. After Malcolm's death, this logic did not disappear. It adapted. Direct repression, surveillance, infiltration, violence remained one tool, but co-option became another. Visibility was offered with conditions attached. Black figures could rise in entertainment, sports, even politics, so long as their critique stayed safely abstract. Equality, yes, justice, broadly defined, but not structural overhaul, not empire, not redistribution of power. And when those lines were crossed, the celebration ended quickly. The long-term effect is subtle but lasting. Generations grow up knowing a handful of approved names, while others, often the most uncompromising, fade from memory. How many people can name Ella Baker or Fannie Lou Hamer as readily as they can name famous entertainers who spoke about civil rights? Both mattered, but only some were allowed to define the story. This was the real danger Malcolm posed. Not only was he an unfiltered voice, he exposed the filtering itself. He insisted that whenever a leader is elevated, we should ask who chose them, and just as importantly, why. Power depends on us not asking, because the machinery of misrepresentation does not run on force alone. It runs on our willingness to mistake selection for consensus and silence for peace. The dynamics Malcolm X warned about didn't die with him. They just changed shape. Today they move through screens instead of streets, through algorithms, timelines, and metrics. We live in a moment where visibility is often mistaken for power, where being seen feels like being heard, even when nothing actually changes. This is the quiet bridge between the 1960s and now. Malcolm talked about celebrities being lifted up in place of organizers. Today we call them influencers. The label is new, but the pattern feels familiar. Dissent isn't just watched anymore, it's packaged, polished, and sold back to us. There are more black faces in public life than ever before. Movie stars, musicians, athletes, even a black president. Online, movements can gather millions of eyes overnight. Hashtags spread fast, attention travels far, and yet the question lingers. Has all this visibility brought us closer to freedom, or has it become a stand-in for it? Representation has grown, no doubt about that. But power hasn't moved nearly as much. We see familiar faces on our screens while wealth gaps stay wide, prisons stay full, and the systems shaping everyday life remain mostly untouched. It's progress in appearance, not in structure. Malcolm's warning echoes loudly here. Fame is not leadership. Today, Martin Luther King Jr.'s gentler words circulate endlessly online, while his angriest critiques of war, capitalism, and economic exploitation are quietly buried. Certain messages are amplified, others are algorithmically forgotten, not erased, just deprioritized, so the lesson remains. A trending hashtag is not a movement, a famous spokesperson is not structural change, and representation without redistribution is a performance. Both King and Malcolm now risk becoming symbols more than disruptors, used, quoted, worn, and consumed. The danger is not forgetting them, but remembering them incorrectly, because when power decides who gets to speak, the responsibility shifts to us to listen harder, dig deeper, and resist the comfort of convenient echoes. From the streets of the 1960s to the age of the algorithm, the architecture of acceptable dissent is still standing. And to truly honor these legacies, we have to ask harder questions. Who benefits from this narrative? What has actually changed? And whose voices are still being filtered out? As Malcolm insisted, real leadership is not granted by visibility, it is earned through struggle. And as King showed, justice is not about being seen doing good, but about doing what is right, even when it costs.
We've got some difficult days ahead, but it really doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place.
But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
I have a dream.
It was a high moment, a great watershed moment. But I must confess that that dream that I had that day has at many points turned into a nightmare. Now, I'm not one to lose hope. I keep on hoping. I still have faith in the future. But I've had to analyze many things over the last few years, and I would say over the last few months. I've gone through a lot of soul-searching and agonizing moments, and I've come to see that we have many more difficult days ahead, and some of the old optimism was a little superficial, and now it must be tempered with a solid realism. And I think the realistic fact is that we still have a long, long way to go.
Memory is a strange thing. It feels solid, dependable, but it isn't. It bends with time, chooses what to keep, and quietly lets the rest slip away. It's easy to believe that the way we remember Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X is simply the result of who they were, that history arrived at these images on its own. But memory is never neutral, especially when power has a hand on the scale. Timing matters more than we like to admit. The moment a life ends often decides how that life will be understood. In both cases, history seized the moment, held it still, and built stories that would outlive the men themselves. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated on April 4, 1968 in Memphis. By then, the civil rights movement had secured its most visible victories. Segregation had been struck down. Voting rights, at least on paper, had been won. From a distance, it could look like a moment of arrival, like something had been completed. But King died just as he was moving into more dangerous territory. Poverty, war, economic power. Those questions were still unfolding when the narrative closed around him. What remained was something simpler. King became the martyr of racial progress, the man who reminded America of its conscience and paid the ultimate price for it, a story shaped in a way the nation could absorb. It was a version of King America knew how to honor.
Do they know about Martin Luther King?
We have left it up to you to be
Could you lower those signs, please? I have some very sad news for all of you, and that is that Martin Luther King was shot and was killed tonight in Memphis. Martin Luther King dedicated his life to love and to justice between fellow human beings. He died in the cause of that effort. In this difficult day, in this difficult time for the United States, it's perhaps well to ask what kind of a nation we are and what direction we want to move in. For those of you who are black, considering the evidence evidently is that there were white people who were responsible, you can be filled with bitterness and with hatred and a desire for revenge. We can move in that direction as a country, in greater polarization, black people amongst blacks and white amongst whites, filled with hatred toward one another. Or we can make an effort, as Martin Luther King did, to understand and to comprehend and replace that violence, that stain of bloodshed that is spread across our land, with an effort to understand compassion and love. For those of you who are black and are tempted to be filled with hatred and mistrust of the injustice of such an act against all white people, I would only say that I can also feel in my own heart the same kind of feeling. I had a member of my family killed, but he was killed by a white man. But we have to make an effort in the United States. We have to make an effort to understand, to get beyond or go beyond these rather difficult times. My favorite poem, my favorite poet was Aeschylus. And he once wrote, "Even in our sleep, pain which cannot forget falls drop by drop upon the heart, until in our own despair, against our will, comes wisdom through the awful grace of God." What we need in the United States is not division. What we need in the United States is not hatred. What we need in the United States is not violence and lawlessness, but is love and wisdom and compassion toward one another, feeling of justice toward those who still suffer within our country, whether they be white or whether they be black. We can do well in this country. We will have difficult times. We've had difficult times in the past, but we will have difficult times in the future. It is not the end of violence. It is not the end of lawlessness, and it's not the end of disorder. But the vast majority of white people and the vast majority of black people in this country want to live together, want to improve the quality of our life, and want justice for all human beings that abide in our land. And what dedicate ourselves to what the Greeks wrote so many years ago, to tame the savageness of man and make gentle the life of this world. Let us dedicate ourselves to that and say a prayer for our country and for our people. Thank you very much.
In the days after his death, even his harshest critics rushed to praise him. Politicians who had called him un-American for opposing the Vietnam War now spoke reverently of his dream. But what they mourned was not the king who was still alive in 1968, it was the king they had already learned how to manage. The later king, the one who spoke of America's spiritual death, who condemned militarism, who planned a poor people's campaign to occupy Washington, quietly slipped out of public memory. Death froze him at 39, and history preserved the version that posed the least threat.
Could you tell us your purpose of being here in Providence for the second time?
The Muslims here in America who follow the Honorable Elijah Muhammad have our annual convention in Chicago every year, and I'm traveling around the country for the purpose of seeing that the groups that are going by caravan are properly organized and properly informed.
Do we have a mosque here in the city of Providence?
Yes, there is a Muslim mosque here in Providence where meetings are held every Thursday night and every Sunday night.
Well, we never hear anything from them. How come?
Well, I religiously believe that the only way the black man's condition can be corrected in America, politically, socially, economically, and otherwise, is if we do it ourselves. And our religion teaches us and gives us the incentive, the ingenuity, the know-how to separate ourselves from white society and try and do for ourselves in our own society what the white man has done for himself and his kind in his society. And many of the so-called Negro integrationists who have looked forward toward the day when they could intermingle with whites, they think that it's outrageous now that it appears that they're just about to make it into the promised land of integration, as Martin Luther King calls it. They think that we are almost traitors to step in at this point and say that we don't want integration.
Well, you say separation instead of segregation. Can this be accomplished, do you think, really?
The black man and the white man in America is already separated. The fact that you have
second-class citizenship is political separation. The fact that you have black people are the last hired and the first fired is economic separation. The fact that you have discrimination is social separation. All we're asking, since separation is practiced, although it's not preached, we're asking that America practice what it preaches or preach what it practices. And whereas up to now the white community benefits, is the sole benefactor from the form of segregation that exists, we want it separate so that the black man can be benefited as well as the white be benefited. And we think that it will solve the race problem. This is just, it doesn't involve hypocrisy, it's recognizing factors as they are, and that's the only way to solve the problem.
Mr. X, are you for total separation right to the point where you might even want your own state?
Yes, we're for, we who follow the Honorable Elijah Muhammad have been taught that total separation is the only way to solve the race problem in this country.
Do you speak at all on anything of a political nature?
Well, it depends upon what you mean by politics. We are a religious group. We're religiously motivated. But when in our religion we're taught that we should have freedom, justice, and equality. Some people place freedom, justice, and equality in a political category. But just as Moses in the Bible, his entire message was a message of separation and freedom for his people. And despite the fact that he was seeking freedom for his people and a land, by the way, for his people, Moses is never represented by anyone other than as a religious leader. He's never called a political leader. And since our people today in America are in the same condition that Moses found his people in, and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad is a modern counterpart of Moses among us, we look upon him as a man of God, a messenger of God, and a religious man in the same light and in the same category and at the same level with Moses.
I was thinking basically of the present Congo situation and its political overtones in many respects. Do you have any comment on the Congo situation?
Whenever the Congo problem, the Angola problem, and the Algeria problem, all of these problems are discussed in the United Nations, race is basically at the bottom of all. And it's a problem that you can't ignore here in America, and that we as Muslims can't ignore here in America, because as these dark countries in Africa gain their independence and they emerge and they rise, it's causing a fall of the European nations. As they become stronger economically, the European nations become weaker economically. It has necessitated their creating this common market in Europe. The common market, or the need for a common market by Europeans, was created by the freedom or the independence of the African nations and the Asian nations. So although Islam is our religion and we're religiously motivated, we can never lose sight of the fact that race is playing, not only here in America, but also on a worldwide basis, on an international basis.
You happened to mention the last time you were here, I believe it was last April, that your group was not a violent group, but you went on from there. Could you repeat this?
We're not a violent group in this sense. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad teaches us never to be the aggressor and to always respect and recognize and obey law and law enforcement officers. And he teaches us always to be in the right, religiously seek to be in the right. But then he teaches us if we're ever attacked, we have the right, the religious right, to defend ourselves. And any act of violence that Muslims have ever been involved in has always been a reaction to an aggressive act that has been committed against us. We don't endorse passive resistance. We don't endorse nonviolence. We don't endorse any kind of peaceful suffering. In fact, we don't endorse anything that's advocated by Martin Luther King that has a tendency to strip and disarm our people in this country at a time when the segregationists in the South are not disarmed. And we think that it is wrong to teach black people in America to be nonviolent at a time when someone is not teaching the white man in America also to be nonviolent.
Have you had any recent incidents?
No, not too recent. However, we had a situation in Monroe, Louisiana, where in our mosque, our religious services were invaded by the police who were trying to stop the spread of Islam in Monroe, Louisiana by frightening the so-called Negroes in that area. And they entered our mosque, they broke into our mosque, armed with riot guns, nightclubs, tear gas, and things of that sort, and a fight did follow. And although the Muslims who follow the Honorable Elijah Muhammad don't believe in carrying any arms whatsoever, Allah did bless us to hospitalize the police who illegally and unjustly and immorally invaded our religious services.
You have a book here called Anti-Slavery by Dwight Lowell Dumond. Could you tell us anything about this?
Yes, this book was authored by a University of Michigan professor. It was published by the University of Michigan Press. It cost $20. And in my opinion, every white person in America, as well as black person in America, should read this book. They would get a better understanding of the machinery that was used to strip the black man who was brought to the West from the East of his culture, of his accomplishments, of his civilization, and relegated to the role of an animal. It tells how he was dehumanized. In fact, it actually spells out the crime that was committed by the slave trader, the slave maker, and the slave master, which is primarily responsible for the condition and the race problem that exists in America today. And one of the best statements in the book, in my opinion, is this professor or scientist points out that second-class citizenship is nothing but a modern version of slavery, which means that according to him, his definition, slavery still exists. 20 million black people here in America are still slaves. The Emancipation Proclamation and the Civil War were fought for nothing. And because it was approached in that day in a hypocritical way, although Lincoln was faced with the problem, all of the presidents since him, including Kennedy today, is still faced with the same problem, because no honest effort has ever been made to solve it, especially by the politicians. No honest effort has ever been.
I read once, passingly, about a man named Shakespeare. I only read about him passingly, but I remember one thing he wrote that kind of moved me. He put it in the mouth of Hamlet, I think it was, who said, "To be or not to be." He was in doubt about something. Whether it was nobler in the mind of man to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, moderation, or to take up arms against the sea of troubles and by opposing, end them. And I go for that. If you take up arms, you'll end it. But if you sit around and wait for the one who's in power to make up his mind that he should end it, you'll be waiting a long time. And in my opinion, the young generation of whites, blacks, browns, whatever else there is, you're living at a time of extremism, a time of revolution, a time when there's got to be a change. People in power have misused it, and now there has to be a change, and a better world has to be built, and the only way it's going to be built is with extreme methods. And I, for one, will join in with anyone, don't care what color you are, as long as you want to change this miserable condition that exists on this earth. Thank you.
Malcolm died before that evolution could fully take shape, and so the image that remained was the earlier one, the militant, the firebrand, the man associated with rifles and rage. Mainstream America never had to reckon with who he was becoming, only with who he had been. The headlines followed quickly: extremist, preacher of hate, a dangerous voice finally silenced. There was no national mourning. In some places there was relief, and so Malcolm too was frozen in time, held in the harshest light possible. Those freeze frames mattered. King became a national icon, a holiday, a monument, a symbol of American redemption. Malcolm became a figure you had to explain, or defend, or distance yourself from. One story fit neatly into a narrative of progress, the other reinforced a warning that radical dissent leads only to chaos. What was lost in all of this was convergence. By stopping the clock where it did, history could keep the two men apart, saint and radical, non-violence and violence, good and bad. It was a simpler story, a useful one. It obscured the fact that King, near the end of his life, sounded more radical than ever, and that Malcolm, near the end of his, was reaching for broader solidarity, cooperation, and human rights. Had either man lived longer, the binary would have collapsed. That is the quiet tragedy here. They were frozen before their paths could fully cross, and history took advantage of that, sanitizing one, marginalizing the other, preserving opposition instead of evolution. Which leaves us with the question history never answered. What if they had had more time? What conversations might have happened? What alliances might have formed? Had they lived longer, their convergence would have been undeniable, and that possibility terrified the establishment. The FBI openly feared the emergence of a leader or a coalition that could unite militant and moderate factions. A black messiah, they called it. King and Malcolm together, even symbolically, would have embodied that threat. Malcolm was killed in 1965, King in 1968. Whatever unity was forming never had the chance to fully arrive, and afterward history smoothed the story. It told us they were opposites, that they could never have agreed, that one was right and the other was wrong. It was a convenient forgetting. The legacies of King and Malcolm ask us to listen again, not to the versions history made comfortable, but to the full force of what they demanded. They were never opposites, they were pressure applied from different directions, exposing the same system. One could be absorbed, the other could not. Together they threatened transformation. That is why memory separated them.
I come here tonight and plead with you. Believe in yourself and believe that you're somebody. And as I said to the group last night, nobody else can do this for us. No document can do this for us. No Lincolnian Emancipation Proclamation can do this for us. No Kennysonian or Johnsonian Civil Rights Bill can do this for us. If the Negro is to be free, he must move down into the inner resources of his own soul and sign with a pen and ink of self-assertive manhood his own Emancipation Proclamation. Don't let anybody take your manhood. Be proud of our heritage. As somebody said earlier tonight, we don't have anything to be ashamed of. Somebody told a lie one day. They couched it in language. They made everything black, ugly, and evil. Look in your dictionary and see the synonyms of the word black. There's always something degrading and low and sinister. Look at the word white. It's always something pure, high, and clean. But I want to get the language right tonight. I want to get the language so right that everybody here will cry out, yes, I'm black, I'm proud of it, I'm black and beautiful.